As a JavaScript developer, it is important to understand how JavaScript evolves and changes, because that is something that is definite in the JavaScript world. It is constantly evolving. When I first started using JavaScript many years ago, it was nothing like the language we have today. It almost feels like a different language altogether. We can do so much more with it now. To understand how JavaScript evolves, we need to talk about two things: ECMAScript and TC39. First, let's talk about ECMAScript. Now, what is ECMAScript? I'm sure you've heard of it. It's battered around all the time. Basically, it's simply a specification used by certain languages. It's standardized by the ECMA International, and that is where the name comes from. JavaScript is the most widely used implementation of ECMAScript, so that's why it's entangled with JavaScript so closely. But there are other languages you've probably heard of that follow this ECMAScript standard. For example, ActionScript, which is the language behind Flash, that is based on the ECMAScript standard, and JScript, which was done by Microsoft. That's also based on that specification. Now, the first edition of the ECMAScript standard came about in June of 1997, and that was referred to as ECMAScript 1 or ES1. And since that time, each additional release has been, that number has been incremented. So ES1, ES2, ES3, and so on. Now, when ECMAScript 6 was released, they started designating the release with the year. And so at that time, the release was technically referred to as ECMAScript 2015, because that's the year that ECMAScript 6 was released. However, ES6 has just stuck. And so people refer to that as ES6 or ECMAScript 2015. They go back and forth between that, because the ES6 release has stuck. That particular release was a huge release with a number of features for JavaScript. If you were in the JavaScript world at that time, you'll remember how many things were added to JavaScript. A lot of things that now make regular use of were added during that particular release. Now, since that version of the standard came out, there has been a new release each year. And so we've had ECMAScript 2016, 2017, 18, 19, 2020. Every year a new release has come out. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the ECMAScript 6 release was so huge. They didn't want another release that big again. And so they're approaching the releases in a much more manageable way. Now, who determines what is in each release? Where does that all come from? Well, that has to do with TC39. So let's talk about that. Now, TC39 stands for Technical Committee 39, and they are a committee that evolves JavaScript. And its members are companies such as browser vendors, that sort of thing, that have a vested interest in JavaScript. The committee meets regularly, and you can follow their minutes online if you choose to. So in that sense, it is transparent. Now, in order for a feature to make it to maturity and become a part of a future ECMAScript standard release, that feature must go through several stages, and we call these the stages of maturity. So TC39, the committee, manages these proposals through these stages until they are accepted as part of the standard. So I want to talk about those stages really quick. So stage 1, or I mean stage 0, the first stage, but stage 0 is actually submission stage. And this is just a submission of a new feature, a proposal for a new feature. And this must come from a TC39 member or someone who is considered a TC39 contributor. And basically it's a document describing what the feature is that they want. So that's stage 0. Stage 1 is the proposal stage. Now this is a formal proposal for the feature, and this must have a champion that is a part of that committee, someone who wants this feature to be adopted. So that is stage 1. Stage 2 is the draft stage. And this is really the first version of what will be in the specification for that particular feature. Once something gets to stage 2, its eventual inclusion is much more likely. Now, stage 3 is the candidate stage. And at this point, the proposal is mostly finished and needs feedback from implementations and from users. And then finally, stage 4 is the finish stage. At this point, it's ready to be included in the specification, and most likely will be included in the next upcoming specification, but that's not necessarily a guarantee. Through all these stages, these features are still considered proposals and are not features until they are officially included in the standard. Now, knowing these stages can be important. For example, if you go to a site such as this and access upcoming features, which is done with this next button, to find out what is supporting and what isn't supporting, notice how it's broken into the stages we just talked about. Here's the candidate stage. Here's what's coming up as a possibility in the next ECMAScript release. And you can see that some browsers and some compilers are already starting to support these proposed features. You can see that over here. As you move down the stages, draft 2, you see that fewer and fewer implementations have already been done. And so, since these vendors have a seat on the committee, they know what's coming up. They may be the champion of a particular proposal, who knows, but they begin implementing some of these things prior to them becoming a part of the official specification. You can see we can even go clear down to stage 0. Not much going on there at all. So when articles or sites like this are talking about proposals, ECMAScript proposals, they're talking about things that are in one of these stages that have not been officially adopted into the standard yet, but are moving in that direction. So that is the process TC39 follows in order to update the ECMAScript standard for JavaScript. All right, let's move on to the next topic.